I Fucked a Vampire. By Lisa Fay. Chapter 1. The forest was a living, breathing entity around me, dark and oppressive, yet strangely beautiful in its haunting stillness. The towering trees stood like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches clawing at the heavy clouds that blotted out the moonlight. The air was cold, damp, and smelled faintly of moss and decay. My breath came in shallow, trembling gasps, each exhale visible in the chill. I pressed my back against the rough bark of an old oak, the sting in my shoulder sharp and relentless. My fingers, slick and sticky with blood, trembled as I tried to stem the flow. It was hopeless. Warm rivulets seeped through the torn fabric of my coat, cascading down my arm in a rhythm that felt like my own fleeting heartbeat. "Don't panic," I whispered to myself, though my voice sounded as fragile as the brittle leaves beneath my boots. A rustling sound broke the silence, soft, distant at first, but growing louder, closer. My pulse quickened, pounding in my ears like a war drum. I tightened my grip on the small silver knife in my good hand, its blade gleaming faintly in the dim, ghostly light filtering through the trees. And then I saw him. At first, he seemed like a shadow given form, emerging from the darkness with an elegance that defied human movement. His figure was tall, impossibly so, cloaked in a long, flowing coat that billowed slightly as he stepped closer. The weak light caught the sharp angles of his face, a face too perfect to belong to any mortal man. His cheekbones were high, his jawline strong, his lips a pale curve of intent. But it was his eyes that rooted me in place. Deep, dark pools with a faint crimson glow that flickered like dying embers. They locked onto me, unblinking, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if I was his prey or his salvation. "Stay back." My voice wavered as I raised the knife, pointing it at him with all the strength I had left in my shaking hand. He stopped, tilting his head slightly, as if amused, or intrigued. "I mean you no harm," he said, his voice low and smooth, like velvet brushing against my skin. "But you are bleeding. Badly." I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead, and the pain in my shoulder was making my vision blur. "I don't trust you," I managed, my voice breaking. "I don't expect you to." His lips quirked into a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. He took a step closer, and I noticed how his gaze lingered on my shoulder, on the blood. He exhaled sharply, and his jaw tensed, as though he were holding himself back. "Stay where you are," I demanded, though my grip on the knife faltered. He sighed, the sound carrying a strange weariness. "If I intended to harm you, you wouldn't have had time to raise that knife." That sent a chill through me, and I stiffened, but he didn't move closer. Instead, he spread his hands slightly, palms up, a gesture of peace. "You'll bleed out if you don't let me help you," he said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. "And believe me, I've seen enough death for one lifetime." I hesitated. My vision was swimming, my strength ebbing away with every drop of blood that soaked into the forest floor. His words, though unsettling, rang with a strange sincerity. Finally, I lowered the knife. Barely. He moved quickly then, crossing the space between us in what felt like a single heartbeat. I flinched as his arms slipped under me, but his touch was surprisingly gentle, almost reverent. I tried to protest, but the words caught in my throat as he lifted me effortlessly, cradling me against his chest. "Don't fight me," he murmured. "You'll only make it worse." Chapter 2. As he carried me through the forest, I couldn't help but notice the strength in his arms, the steadiness of his stride. He smelled faintly of rain and something richer, darker, a scent I couldn't place but found oddly comforting. We emerged into a clearing where a sprawling, Gothic mansion loomed like a shadowed giant against the horizon. Its towering spires and arched windows gleamed faintly, their edges softened by a shroud of mist. He carried me inside, through grand, dimly lit hallways filled with the scent of old books and polished wood. His study was unlike anything I'd ever seen, dark and opulent, yet oddly intimate. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting flickering light on shelves crammed with ancient tomes and curiosities. A mahogany desk sat near the center, cluttered with parchments and quills, while a chaise lounge and an armchair upholstered in deep burgundy velvet were ranged near the fire. The room smelled of parchment, ink, and faintly of smoke. He laid me on the chaise with a care that felt almost tender. "This will hurt," he said, pulling a small, ornate dagger from his coat. My breath hitched. "What are you doing?" "Cutting away the fabric," he replied, his tone calm but firm. "I can't clean the wound otherwise." I nodded weakly, too exhausted to argue. As he worked, his hands steady and efficient, I watched him closely. His face was a mask of concentration, though his eyes betrayed the occasional flicker of something else, something primal. I noticed the way his nostrils flared, the way his jaw tightened whenever fresh blood seeped from the wound. Yet he never wavered, never gave in to whatever urges burned behind those crimson eyes. "Why are you helping me?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Because I can." "That's not an answer." "No, it's not." His lips curved into the faintest smile before he turned his attention back to my wound. I winced as the sharp sting of alcohol touched my wound, hissing softly between clenched teeth. "A little warning next time," I muttered, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Would you prefer I lie to you?" He paused, his lips twitching in what might have been amusement. "No," I admitted, though his calm indifference grated on my nerves. "But you could work on your bedside manner." He raised a single dark brow, and the faintest smirk tugged at his lips. "I'll add that to my list of flaws," he said, his voice laced with dry humor. I wanted to respond, maybe even bite back with some wit of my own, but the warmth of the fire, combined with my growing exhaustion, was making it hard to focus. My head lolled back against the chaise, my gaze drifting to the intricate carvings on the ceiling beams. "Stay awake," he ordered, his tone sharp enough to slice through my haze. I blinked and forced my eyes to meet his. "Why? Afraid I'll bleed out?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." The bluntness of his response sent a shiver down my spine. He wasn't looking at me anymore, his focus fixed on my shoulder as he worked with a speed and precision that hinted at centuries of experience. His fingers, cool against my fevered skin, moved deftly to stitch the wound with a thread he'd drawn from a small, black case. "Do you always carry medical supplies?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No." His reply was curt, but then his eyes flicked up to meet mine, softening slightly. "But I've learned to be prepared for unexpected circumstances. Like bleeding humans wandering onto your property." He didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth worked upward, a fleeting expression that was gone as quickly as it appeared. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the crackling fire and the soft clink of tools as he worked. I studied him, my fear giving way to a reluctant curiosity. There was something timeless about him, a kind of quiet elegance that felt utterly at odds with the primal hunger I'd glimpsed in his eyes earlier. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice softer now, almost hesitant. His hand stilled for the briefest moment before he resumed. "Kai Kandimer," he said simply, his tone devoid of inflection, as though the name meant nothing. "Kai." I tested the name, letting it roll off my tongue. It felt as mysterious as the man himself, sharp and smooth all at once. "And what are you, Kai?" His hands froze completely this time. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to mine, and for a moment, I saw something raw in his expression, hesitation, perhaps even regret. "You already know," he said quietly, the words laced with an edge that made my heart skip. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. "I think I do. But I want to hear you say it. May I know your name first?" "Gorina Donovan." He leaned back slightly, the firelight casting flickering shadows across his face. For a moment, he seemed to struggle, as though weighing the risk of honesty. Then he exhaled, a soft, almost resigned sound. "I am what your kind would call a vampire," he said at last, his voice low and steady. The word hung between us, heavy and final. I didn't flinch, though every instinct screamed that I should. Instead, I found myself whispering, "Then why didn't you? Kill you?" He finished for me, his eyes darkening. He stood abruptly, turning away from me and pacing toward the window. His silhouette against the frosted glass was both regal and haunted. Because I'm not a monster, Garina. At least, I try not to be. The way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine, and I wasn't sure if it was from fear or something else entirely. Try not to be? I asked, pushing myself upright despite the searing pain in my shoulder. What does that mean? He turned back to me, his expression unreadable. It means I have to fight every moment of my existence against what I am. Against what you represent. His gaze dropped briefly to my shoulder, and I saw it again, that flicker of hunger, barely restrained. I should have been terrified. Every logical part of me screamed that I was sitting in the den of a predator, one who could end my life in an instant. And yet, I wasn't afraid. Not of him. You saved me, I said softly, meeting his gaze. Yes, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. And now, you'll have to decide whether that was a mistake. Kai's words lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken as he turned his back to me again, his broad shoulders stiff beneath his tailored coat. He rested one hand on the windowsill, staring out into the misty darkness beyond. I could see the tension in the line of his jaw, in the way his fingers gripped the wood as though restraining something far more dangerous than himself. His hair falls in cascading waves of obsidian silk, framing his face with an almost regal carelessness. The strands glint with a bluish sheen under the dim light, their texture enticing enough to make one long to run their fingers through it. Occasionally, a stray lock falls over his forehead, which he brushes aside with an elegance that seems practiced yet effortlessly natural. I shifted slightly on the chaise, testing my arm. Pain flared immediately, sharp and unrelenting, but I couldn't sit idly while questions swirled in my mind. "Kay," I said, my voice breaking the fragile silence. He didn't turn. "Kay," I tried again, firmer this time. "If you regret saving me, then why did you do it? You could have left me out there, and no one would have known. No one except me," he finished, his voice low and hollow. He turned to face me at last, his eyes shadowed by something deeper than regret. "That's precisely why I couldn't." He strode back toward me, his movements fluid yet purposeful, and stopped just short of the chaise. Kneeling in front of me, he rested his forearms on his knees and looked up, meeting my gaze. For the first time, I noticed the faint crimson ring around his irises, more pronounced now in the firelight. "You think I'm dangerous, don't you?" he asked, his tone softer than I expected. "Yes," I admitted, my breath hitching. He tilted his head slightly, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Good. You should." His honesty sent a shiver down my spine, but there was no malice in his voice, only a strange kind of warning, as if he were trying to protect me from himself. "But danger doesn't always mean harm," he continued, his gaze never wavering from mine. "Sometimes, it means survival." I blinked, confused. What does that even mean? He carries an air of ancient wisdom and weariness, as though he has walked through centuries, seen empires rise and fall, and yet remains untouched by time. There's a flicker of something darker in his gaze, regret, perhaps, or deep, unrelenting hunger that he conceals behind his poised demeanor. His charm is a web, his allure a trap, and his power is undeniable, making him both an object of desire and a figure of fear. He leaned back slightly, resting his weight on his heels. "It means that, whether you believe it or not, saving you wasn't just for your sake. It was for mine, too." "For you?" His eyes darkened, his expression briefly slipping into something raw and unguarded. "Do you know what it's like to feel the weight of centuries, Karina? To wander through time, watching the world change, knowing you never will?" I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. There's a predatory sharpness to his smile, a subtle flash of his elongated canines when his lips part. His presence is intoxicating but suffused with the undeniable sense of a predator stalking its prey. He is the embodiment of temptation, seductive yet perilous, beautiful but lethal. "I've seen lives begin and end," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Watched humanity rise and fall, and through it all, I've stayed the same. Unchanged. Untouched. But you." He trailed off, his gaze dropping to my bandaged shoulder. "You reminded me of something I thought I'd forgotten." "And what's that?" I asked, my voice trembling. That even after all this time, I'm still capable of choosing mercy over instinct. That maybe there's a part of me that isn't lost to this existence. His words struck something deep within me. Despite the fear, despite the pain, I felt a strange pull toward him, as if his brokenness mirrored something in myself. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely audible. Kai stood, his movements slow and deliberate. Now, you rest. Your wound is deep, and the forest isn't safe at night. I frowned, watching as he moved to the fireplace and stoked the flames. And after that? He hesitated, his back to me, before finally speaking. After that, you leave. His words hit like a blow, and I couldn't hide the hurt in my voice. You're just going to send me away? It's for your own good, he said, turning to face me. His expression was stoic, but his eyes betrayed the conflict within him. The longer you stay here, the harder it will be for me to keep my word. And for you to keep your life. I shook my head, frustration and confusion bubbling to the surface. You saved me, Kai. You brought me here. And now you're just done with me? His gaze softened, and for a moment, he looked almost human. Almost. Garina, I saved you because I couldn't let you die. But that doesn't mean I can keep you here. Not when I. He stopped himself, clenching his jaw as though the words were too painful to say. Not when you what? I pressed, leaning forward despite the pain in my shoulder. He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. Not when I want you to stay. The room fell silent again, the crackle of the fire the only sound between us. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of fear, anger, and something I couldn't quite name. You're not making any sense, I said finally, my voice shaking. He took a step closer, his presence towering yet strangely comforting. I know, he said quietly. But sense doesn't matter when instinct takes over. And I won't let myself hurt you, Garina. Not like that. I looked up at him, searching his face for answers, but all I saw was the weight of his struggle. And in that moment, I realized that whatever he was fighting, it wasn't just about me. It was about him. Kai's words hung in the air like a final decree, but I wasn't ready to accept them. I wasn't ready to leave. I don't want to go, I said quietly, my voice trembling but resolute. His expression hardened. That's not your choice to make. My jaw clenched as I pushed myself upright, ignoring the searing pain that radiated from my shoulder. You think I'm just going to walk away from all of this? From you? His gaze sharpened, his eyes narrowing as though he hadn't expected my defiance. You don't understand what you're asking, Garina. Then make me understand, I snapped, my frustration boiling over. Explain why saving me means pushing me away. Explain why you think I'd be safer out there, bleeding and alone, than here with you. He let out a low growl, his composure slipping for the first time. Because being here will destroy you. The raw intensity of his voice sent a shiver down my spine, but I refused to back down. And leaving me out there wouldn't? His shoulders tensed, and he looked away, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For a long moment, he didn't speak, the only sound the steady crackle of the fire. When he finally turned back to me, his expression was a mask of resignation. You don't know what you're asking for, he said, his voice quieter now, almost pained. But if you insist on staying, you'll need rest first. I blinked, surprised by his sudden shift. Does that mean I can? It means we'll talk about this tomorrow, he interrupted, his tone firm. Right now, you're injured and exhausted. Anything beyond that can wait. I hesitated, studying his face for any hint of deception, but all I saw was a strange mix of concern and weariness. Finally, I nodded. Fine, I said, leaning back against the shades with a wince. But I'm not agreeing to leave. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. I didn't expect you would. Without another word, he moved to a tall cabinet near the far wall, its dark wood polished to a gleam. Pulling it open, he retrieved a small brass key before crossing the room to a door tucked between two bookcases. This way, he said, gesturing for me to follow. I stood slowly, cradling my injured arm, and made my way toward him. My legs felt weak, unsteady, but I managed to keep my balance as I stepped into the hallway. The space beyond was dimly lit, the flickering sconces casting long shadows on the ornate wallpaper. Kai led me down the hall in silence, his movements a predator's grace, silent, calculated, and hypnotic. Each step seems deliberate, as though the very ground acknowledges his dominance, until we reached a door near the end. He pushed it open, revealing a modest yet elegant bedroom. The room was warmer than I expected, the glow of a single lantern illuminating a four-poster bed draped in deep emerald green fabric. A small writing desk sat beneath a tall window, and a woven rug covered the dark wooden floor. Despite its simplicity, the space exuded a quiet comfort. "You can stay here tonight," Kai said, stepping aside to let me enter. "The door locks from the inside." He held up the brass key, then placed it on the desk. I glanced at the lock, then back at him. "You don't have to keep reminding me to be afraid of you." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm not reminding you to fear me, Karina. I'm giving you a choice. If it makes you feel safer, use the lock." I hesitated, unsure what to say. There was something in his voice, a faint note of vulnerability that I hadn't expected. "Thank you," I said finally, stepping into the room. He lingered in the doorway, his gaze sweeping over me one last time. "Rest," he said softly. "We'll speak in the morning." And with that, he turned and left, pulling the door closed behind him. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the key on the desk. My mind raced, replaying everything that had happened, his strength, his restraint, the haunted look in his eyes. I picked up the key, turning it over in my hand. He'd given me control, a way to protect myself if I felt the need. But I wasn't afraid of him, not anymore. Setting the key back down, I turned toward the bed and let out a shaky breath. The sheets were soft and inviting, and as I sank into them, exhaustion finally overtook me. Still, as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Chapter 3. Morning came slowly, sunlight filtering through the heavy emerald curtains of the bedroom. I woke to the faint aroma of something warm and savory, a scent that coaxed me out of the plush comfort of the bed despite the lingering ache in my shoulder. I found fresh clothes folded neatly on the chair near the desk, a simple linen blouse and soft wool trousers, nothing elaborate but far more practical than my torn and blood-stained dress. Grateful for the consideration, I dressed quickly, wincing as the movement pulled at my injury. When I stepped into the hall, I found Kai waiting for me, leaning casually against the opposite wall. His gaze flicked over me briefly, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," he said, his voice low but even. "Morning," I replied, feeling an odd warmth under his scrutiny. He gestured down the hall. "Come. Breakfast is ready." I followed him to a dining room I hadn't seen the night before. The space was smaller than I'd expected, intimate rather than grand, with a single oval table set near a large bay window. The morning light spilled across the polished wood, catching the delicate silver trim on the porcelain dishes. Kai had already arranged a modest meal, fresh bread, soft butter, jam, and a pot of what I assumed was tea, its steam curling invitingly in the cool morning air. There was also a plate of what looked like poached eggs, their creamy centers glistening faintly under a sprinkle of herbs. "I didn't expect you to cook," I said as I took a seat, the chair creaking softly beneath me. Kai seated himself across from me, his movements as poised as ever. "I didn't," he admitted, his lips quirking faintly. "The house has certain amenities that allow me to manage without staff." "Of course it does," I muttered, unsure whether I was more amused or baffled by his mysterious life. He poured tea into 2 cups and slid one toward me, his movements precise and deliberate. I watched him carefully, studying the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair, how it softened the sharp angles of his face. There was something almost painfully graceful about him, and I found it difficult to look away. "You're staring," he said, breaking the silence. Heat rushed to my cheeks. "I wasn't staring," I lied, reaching for the tea to busy myself. He gave a faint hum of disbelief but didn't press the matter. I took a sip of the tea, its warmth soothing. So, I began, glancing at him over the rim of the cup, are we going to talk about last night? His brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't look away. What do you want to know? Well, for starters, why you keep insisting I leave when it's clear you don't actually want me to. His jaw tightened, and he set his cup down with deliberate care. It's not about what I want, Karina. It's about what's best for you. And you think what's best for me is to wander back into that forest, injured and alone? I countered, raising an eyebrow. He sighed, a sound that spoke of centuries of weariness. You're safer away from me. Safe is relative, I said, tearing a piece of bread from the loaf. And honestly, I feel safer here than I did out there. His gaze softened, just slightly, but he didn't respond. I reached for the plate of cream to spread on my bread, pausing when I noticed a small streak of white on his cheek. It was such a small, unexpected detail that I couldn't help but smile. "Kay," I said, setting down the knife. He looked up, his brows drawing together in question. Without thinking, I leaned across the table and brushed my thumb against his cheek, wiping away the errant streak of cream. The touch was brief, almost casual, but the warmth of his skin under my fingers lingered longer than I anticipated. "There," I said, sitting back and sucking the cream from my thumb with a soft hum of satisfaction. "Got it." Kai didn't move. He didn't even blink. For a moment, he simply stared at me, his expression caught somewhere between bewilderment and something far deeper, as if the gesture had struck a chord he hadn't known existed. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "Nothing," he said quickly, though his voice sounded slightly rougher than before. He reached for his tea, using the motion to compose himself. "It's nothing." I couldn't help but smile, though I didn't press him further. Instead, I turned my attention back to my meal, pretending not to notice the way his eyes lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. After breakfast, the conversation between us grew easier, though Kai still carried a certain guardedness, like a fortress braced against a siege. He showed me to a small sitting room adjacent to the dining area, where the air smelled faintly of old parchment and wood polish. A cluster of books rested on a low table near an armchair, their spines worn and titles obscured by time. "Do you read?" he asked, gesturing toward the collection. "I do," I said, brushing a finger along the cracked leather cover of one. "Though I don't imagine these are light romances or thrilling adventures." A faint smile touched his lips. "No, I'm afraid not. History, philosophy, some poetry. The kind of things you read when time stretches endlessly ahead." The melancholy in his voice made my chest ache. How long had he spent here alone, surrounded by books and silence? "Poetry sounds nice," I said, pulling one of the smaller volumes from the stack. He raised an eyebrow, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You don't strike me as the poetic type. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think." His gaze lingered on me, searching, before he straightened. "Maybe I don't." The hours drifted by in a haze of quiet conversation and stolen glances. Kai had an uncanny ability to make even the simplest topics feel profound, as if his words carried the weight of centuries. He told me stories about the forests surrounding his manor, of the wolves that prowled its edges and the strange, luminous flowers that only bloomed under moonlight. When the afternoon sun dipped lower, he suggested we step outside for some air. The idea surprised me. I hadn't expected him to willingly leave the manor's protective walls. The garden, nestled behind the house, was an enchanting blend of wild beauty and careful cultivation. Ivy climbed the stone walls, and clusters of deep red roses stood stark against the surrounding greenery. A small stone bench sat beneath an archway of twisted vines, and the air carried the faintest hint of lavender. "You take care of this yourself?" I asked, brushing my fingers against the petals of a rose. "It helps pass the time," he admitted, watching me carefully. "And it reminds me that even in isolation, life can still find a way." I glanced at him, struck again by the depth of his words. There was a fragility in his honesty, as if he hadn't spoken these thoughts aloud in a very long time. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "So are you," he replied, almost without thinking. The words hung between us, heavy and electric. He looked away quickly, as if regretting the slip, but my heart hammered in my chest. He began, but I stepped closer, cutting him off. "Kay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to keep pushing me away." He turned to face me fully, his dark eyes searching mine. "You don't understand what you're asking for, Karina. To stay here, to stay with me, it's not safe." "Then make it safe," I said, surprising even myself with the conviction in my voice. "You say I'm safer away from you, but I don't believe that. Not after everything you've done to protect me." He reached out as if to touch my face but stopped himself, his hand hovering inches from my skin. I could see the struggle in his expression, the way his restraint warred with something deeper, something primal. "You don't know what you're doing to me," he murmured, his voice low and almost reverent. "Maybe I do," I replied, my heart pounding. For a moment, the world seemed to still. The wind rustled softly through the garden, carrying the scent of roses, and the sunlight cast a golden glow over everything. And then, slowly, his hand brushed against my cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "I've been alone for so long," he admitted, his voice breaking ever so slightly. "I don't know how to let someone in. Especially not someone like you." I placed my hand over his, holding it against my cheek. "Then let me show you how." Chapter 4. The days that followed blurred into a strange, hypnotic rhythm. Though we spoke often, there were still barriers between us, walls of unspoken fears and desires he refused to tear down. But his actions told a different story. He was attentive, always watching over me, always ensuring I was comfortable. He didn't touch me often, his self-restraint was palpable, but when his hand brushed mine, or his shoulder leaned closer than necessary, it sent a fire racing through my veins. One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, I found myself drawn to the study again. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting a soft amber glow over the room. Kai sat in his chair, a book resting open in his hands, though his eyes seemed far away. I hovered in the doorway for a moment, my breath catching at the sight of him. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the sculpted line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a hint of smooth skin and the faintest trace of muscle beneath. "Are you going to come in, or are you planning to stare all night?" His voice, smooth as velvet, startled me out of my reverie. "I wasn't staring," I lied, stepping into the room. "Liar," he murmured, but there was no malice in his tone, only a hint of amusement. I moved to the chair opposite him, curling my legs beneath me. "You seem distracted tonight." He closed the book slowly, setting it aside. "Perhaps. Care to share what's on your mind?" His eyes met mine, dark and endless, and for a moment, I thought he might. But instead, he shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Some thoughts are better left unspoken." "Why?" I pressed, leaning forward slightly. "Because once they're spoken, they can't be taken back." I held his gaze, my heart pounding at the weight of his words. Maybe some thoughts shouldn't be taken back. The silence between us grew thick, charged. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, bringing him closer to me. "Karina," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what you're doing to me." "Then tell me," I whispered back, my voice trembling. "Help me understand." He reached out then, his hand hovering inches from my face as though he were battling with himself. Finally, his fingers brushed against my cheek, sending a shiver down my spine. "You are temptation," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "A force I've tried to resist but can't seem to escape." I turned my head slightly, pressing my cheek into his palm. "Then stop trying to escape." His breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought he might pull away. But instead, his hand slid to the back of my neck, tangling gently in my hair. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't care," I replied, my heart racing. And then his lips were on mine, tentative at first, as though testing the limits of his control. But the moment I responded, the kiss deepened, passion igniting between us like a spark to dry kindling. His hand cradled my face, his touch firm yet achingly gentle, while his other arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me closer. I felt the heat of him, the strength that hummed beneath his skin, and it overwhelmed me in the best way. When we finally broke apart, our breaths mingling in the charged air, he rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted this," he admitted, his voice raw. "More than I should." "Then don't stop," I whispered, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. His laugh was low and filled with something bittersweet. "You don't understand what you've awakened, Garina. What it means for someone like me to feel this way." "Then show me," I said, my voice trembling but sure. "Whatever it is, whoever you are, I'm not afraid." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I saw everything he tried to keep hidden, the longing, the fear, the hunger. "You should be," he murmured, but his lips found mine again, his restraint slipping further with every second we were together. Kai grew quieter over the next days, his movements sharper, his presence somehow heavier. I could feel the weight of his internal struggle, see it in the way his jaw clenched when I leaned too close, in the way his hands curled into fists when I touched him without thinking. Every stolen glance, every accidental brush of hands seemed to spark something volatile between us, a fire neither of us dared to fully acknowledge but couldn't extinguish. Chapter 5. One late evening I had ventured into the garden again, drawn by the soft glow of the moonlight and the quiet hum of the night. The air was cool, carrying the scent of roses and damp earth, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of a wolf's howl. I didn't hear him approach. One moment I was alone, and the next, Kai was there, a shadow in the moonlight. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice low and rough, as though he were holding something back. "I need a dare," I replied, turning to face him. "I didn't think you'd mind." "It's not that." His eyes glinted in the dim light, darker than I'd ever seen them. "This place. It's not safe at night." "I thought your lands were protected." "They are," he said, stepping closer. "But there are dangers even I can't control." There was something in his tone that sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't tell if it was fear or something else entirely. "Kay, what's going on?" I asked, my voice softer now. He stopped just in front of me, his presence overwhelming in the quiet night. "You should be afraid of me, Garina," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think you know me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But you don't. You see the man, the mask I wear. You don't see what lies beneath." "Then let me see," I said, my voice trembling but steady. His eyes burned into mine, and for a moment, I thought he might refuse. But then he pulled me closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, the steady, unyielding strength of him. "You asked for this," he murmured, his breath ghosting against my cheek. And then his lips were on mine, fierce and consuming, nothing like the hesitant kisses we had shared before. This was raw, unrestrained, a tempest of emotion that left me breathless. I felt his hands at my waist, pulling me closer, his grip possessive yet desperate, as though he were afraid I might disappear. The world around us seemed to vanish, the only reality the heat of his body against mine, the intoxicating pull of his lips. When he pulled back, his breathing was ragged, his eyes wild. The moonlight caught on his face, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, the faint gleam of his fangs, sharp and glinting like polished ivory. My breath hitched, but I didn't pull away. "You see now," he said, his voice rough. "What I am." I reached up, my fingers brushing against his cheek. "You're Kai," I said simply. "That's all I need to know." "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I want you, Garina. I've never wanted anything more. But my desire, it's dangerous. It could destroy you." His hands tightened on my waist, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me again. But instead, he stepped back, his expression torn. "This is madness," he said, running a hand through his hair. "You have no idea what you're asking for." "Then tell me," I said, following him. "Show me." He turned to face me, his eyes blazing. "If I do, Garina, there's no turning back. Once you've seen the darkness in me, you won't be able to forget it." I reached out, my hand brushing against his chest. I'm not afraid of the darkness, Kai. I'm afraid of losing you. For a long moment, he stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, with a resigned sigh, he pulled me into his arms, holding me as though I were the only thing tethering him to the earth. "I'll show you," he murmured, his lips brushing against my temple. "But you have to promise me one thing." "What?" I whispered. "Don't fall in love with me," he said, his voice filled with both warning and longing. I closed my eyes, resting my head against his chest. "It's too late for that." Chapter 6. Kai held me close, his arms like steel bands around me, yet his touch was so careful, so gentle. The heat of him seeped into my skin, and for a moment, I let myself forget everything, the strangeness of this place, the danger he warned of, even the sharp teeth I had glimpsed in the moonlight. But then he stepped back, as though realizing how tightly he held me. His hands lingered on my arms, his dark eyes filled with conflict, regret, and something dangerously close to longing. "You can't fall in love with me, Garina," he said, his voice low, rough with barely restrained emotion. The words hit me like a blow, though I tried not to show it. "Why not?" I asked softly. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, the gesture so human it was almost disarming. "Because I'm not what you think I am. I may look like a man, speak like a man, but I am not human. I am not safe." "Safe?" I echoed, my voice catching. "You've done nothing but protect me since the moment you found me. How can you say you're not safe?" He looked over his shoulder at me, his expression dark. "Protection is one thing. Passion is another." I took a step closer, emboldened by the raw emotion in his voice. "What are you so afraid of, Kai? That you'll hurt me? That you'll lose control?" "Yes," he said, turning to face me fully. "I live on the edge of control, Garina. Every moment I'm near you, I fight the part of me that wants." He cut himself off, his jaw tightening. "Wants what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "To consume you," he said finally, his voice breaking. "Body, soul, everything. I would take and take until there was nothing left. That is what I am, Garina. A predator. And you are." He stopped again, his eyes raking over me, softening. "Your light. Your life. I don't want to extinguish that." "You won't," I said, stepping even closer until I could feel the warmth of him. "You think I'm fragile, Kay, but I'm stronger than you know. And maybe you're stronger than you think, too." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You don't understand. The hunger, it's always there, gnawing at me, whispering in the back of my mind. It's not just your blood, though that alone tests every ounce of restraint I have. It's you. Your voice, your scent, the way you look at me." His hand lifted as if to touch me, but he stopped short, letting it fall back to his side. "You make me feel alive in ways I haven't in centuries. And that terrifies me. Because you're afraid to lose control," I said, reaching out to take his hand in mine. His fingers were cold, but they tightened around mine instinctively. "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let me show you that you don't have to be afraid. That you can trust me." He stared at me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with something unspoken. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek. "I don't know if I can trust myself," he said, his voice raw. "You can," I whispered, leaning into his touch. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, his gaze dark and intense. "If I give in, Garina, there's no turning back. Once I let you in, I won't be able to let you go. And I'll be here," I said simply. For a moment, he didn't move, as though frozen by my words. Then, with a low growl that sent a shiver down my spine, he pulled me against him, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was anything but restrained. Kai's lips claimed mine with a hunger that was both thrilling and terrifying, a kiss that seemed to pull me into him, leaving no room for hesitation or fear. His hands, so careful before, now gripped my waist firmly, as if anchoring himself to me. There was a rawness to his movements, a need that he couldn't hide. I wasn't afraid. I let my hands slide up his chest, feeling the solid strength beneath the fabric of his shirt, the way his muscles tense beneath my touch. He shuddered, breaking the kiss for a moment to rest his forehead against mine. "Garina," he breathed, his voice hoarse. "We shouldn't." "Then stop," I whispered, my voice trembling but sure. "If that's what you truly want, stop." He didn't move. His breathing was heavy, his hands still holding me as though he couldn't bear to let go. "That's what I thought," I murmured, tilting my head to press a kiss to his jaw, just below his ear. His control snapped. Before I could process what was happening, he swept me into his arms. His movements were swift but careful, and I barely had time to catch my breath before we were in his bedroom. The space was both regal and austere, much like Kai himself. Dark wood dominated the room, from the massive four-poster bed with its heavy, deep red canopy to the carved wardrobe against the wall. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light across the polished floor and the velvet curtains drawn tightly against the windows. He set me down gently, as though I might shatter under his touch, but the intensity in his gaze betrayed his restraint. "We should stop," he said again, his voice low and strained. "Do you want to stop?" I asked, stepping closer. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "No." "Then don't," I said, lifting my hand to trace the line of his collarbone. He closed his eyes, his breath hitching as my fingers brushed against his skin. When he opened them again, they were darker than I'd ever seen, the faint glint of his fangs visible as he parted his lips. A low growl escaped him, and before I could react, he closed the distance between us, his hands framing my face as he kissed me again. This kiss was different, slower, deeper, filled with an aching tenderness that left me breathless. His hands roamed, tracing the curve of my back, the line of my shoulders. His touch was electric, sending shivers racing across my skin. I let my own hands explore, sliding over the broad expanse of his chest, up to his neck, tangling in his hair. He pulled back slightly, his lips hovering just above mine as he searched my gaze. "Tell me if it's too much," he murmured, his voice a mere whisper. "It's not," I said, pulling him closer. He let out a shaky breath, his lips trailing down the line of my jaw, to the sensitive spot just below my ear. I gasped, my fingers tightening in his hair as his mouth moved lower, brushing against the curve of my neck. "Kai," I whispered, feeling the faint graze of his teeth against my skin. He froze, his entire body going rigid. "I'm fine," I said quickly, cupping his face in my hands. "I trust you." His eyes met mine, filled with something I couldn't quite name, fear, longing, reverence. "You shouldn't," he said softly. "But I do," I said, brushing my thumb over his cheekbone. He leaned into my touch, his eyes fluttering shut for a moment before he kissed me again. This time, it was slower, more deliberate, as though he were savoring every moment. His hands never strayed too far, his touch always hovering on the edge of restraint. I unbuttoned his shirt slowly, my fingers brushing against the smooth, cool skin beneath. The fabric slid from his shoulders like a whisper, pooling at his feet, leaving his chest bare before me. The firelight played across his skin, illuminating every line of muscle, every shadowed curve. He was breathtaking, a vision of strength and grace, yet there was a vulnerability in the way he stood before me, his eyes dark and searching. My hands moved to his trousers, trembling slightly as I fumbled with the buttons. The sound of my own breathing filled my ears, each inhale shallow and uneven. I managed to loosen the fabric, but tugging them down seemed insurmountable with the way my hands quivered. Kai reached for me then, his movements fluid and sure. His hands brushed mine away as he deftly removed my blouse, the thin material slipping from my shoulders. His fingers lingered for a moment against my skin, as if savoring the warmth. "Garina," he murmured, his voice low and full of tension. "We should stop." His words hung in the air, but neither of us stopped. My heart pounded in my chest, my resolve steady despite the storm raging in his gaze. I finally managed to pull the last of his clothing away, leaving him standing before me, bare and utterly unguarded. My own garments soon joined his on the floor, the cool air of the room raising goosebumps on my skin. He stepped closer, his hands trembling as they hovered near my waist, as if unsure whether to touch me or not. His eyes, dark and filled with longing, roamed over me, taking in every detail. "Gorina," he said softly, his voice barely audible. "What if I can't stop? What if I hurt you?" I reached up, cupping his face in my hands. His skin was smooth beneath my palms, the sharp angles of his jaw contrast to the tenderness in his eyes. "Kay," I said, my voice steady despite the wild thrum of my heart. "We'll be okay." I leaned in, brushing my lips against his in a kiss so gentle it felt like a promise. He exhaled sharply, his hands finally settling on my hips as he pulled me closer, his restraint hanging by a thread. His forehead rested against mine, his breath mingling with my own. "You're everything I shouldn't want," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And yet here we are," I replied, my hands trailing up his chest to rest over his heart. My hand slid down his arm, fingers intertwining with his. His skin was cool to the touch, yet his presence radiated an unyielding heat that seemed to consume me entirely. "Let's move to the bed," I whispered, my voice low but firm, as I gently tugged him toward it. Kai hesitated, his body rigid with tension. His eyes, dark and filled with conflict, flickered to the large bed behind me. "Gorina," he murmured, his voice strained, "this is dangerous." Chapter 7. The tension broke as I gently pulled him forward. His feet followed mine, hesitant at first, then with purpose. I led him to the bed, the firelight casting flickering shadows across the dark room. When we reached the edge of the bed, I let go of his hand and turned to face him. His gaze burned into me, an intense mix of passion and torment. Slowly, I sat on the edge of the mattress and looked up at him, the silence between us speaking volumes. His hand moved, almost of its own accord, to cup my face. His thumb brushed along my cheekbone, the touch so tender it made my heart ache. "Gorina," he said again, his voice a whispered plea. "If I hurt you," his lips moved slowly, reverently, tracing the line of my collarbone, down to the curve of my shoulder. I let out a soft gasp, my fingers tightening on his arms. "Kai." Hovering over me, he hesitated, his fingers brushing against my cheek. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice almost pleading. "Please, Gorina, tell me to stop." I reached up, my hand resting against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath my palm. "I don't want you to stop," I said, my voice steady. His eyes closed briefly, his jaw tightening as though in pain. "You don't know how much I want you," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "But if I take too much, you won't," I said, cutting him off. "I trust you, Kai. I always have." His eyes opened, filled with a mix of longing and torment. "You're not afraid of me," he said, almost to himself. "No," I said softly. "Because I see you, Kai. All of you. And I'm not afraid." For a moment, he just looked at me, his gaze filled with something I could only describe as reverence. Then, slowly, he leaned down, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both fierce and tender. His hands moved with purpose, tracing the curves of my body as though committing every inch of me to memory. His touch was reverent, almost worshipful, and I could feel the depth of his restraint in every movement. I wrapped my arms around him, pulling him closer, needing to feel the solid weight of him against me. The heat of his skin, the strength of his arms, it was intoxicating, overwhelming, and I surrendered to it completely. "Kay," I whispered, my voice trembling with both desire and emotion. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his breath warm against my skin. "You'll be the death of me, Gorina," he murmured, his voice filled with both despair and wonder. "I'm not afraid of your darkness, Kai. I'm not afraid of you." His lips found mine again, and this time, there was no hesitation, no holding back. "Are you sure this is what you want?" I nodded. "Lie down," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I obeyed, my body sinking into the softness of the mattress as I looked up at him. He stood over me for a moment, his eyes tracing the lines of my body, taking in every detail. Slowly, he lowered himself beside me, the bed dipping under his weight. He slowly lowered his hand between my thighs and started tracing circles over my heat. I arched my body onto his and he let out a growling sound. In an instant he pulled me underneath him and I could feel his length resting on my thigh. He looked at me as if hoping for me to stop him. "I want you, Kai, I want to feel you." He slides it in gently at first but continues to increase the pace. He thrusts powerfully and with every hit my body jolts. Pain and passion mingle together as Kai succumbs to his desires. He pulls out and with a swift move he rolls me onto my stomach. He grabs my ass and I can feel his nails digging in the skin. He lowers his mouth and licks at the dripping blood, almost sending him into a frenzy. He parts my cheeks and inserts it in the rim with a violent push. I moan, the sound escaping me louder than I intended, raw and unguarded. Kai stills for a moment, his dark eyes meeting mine, the intensity of his gaze grounding me even as my heart races. The tension in his expression softens ever so slightly, his desire and self-control warring visibly beneath the surface. "Garina," he whispers, his voice trembling, a mix of need and restraint. "I can't, don't stop, Kay," I murmur, my voice firm but laced with a plea, as my hands find his shoulders. My fingertips press into his cool skin, anchoring me to the moment, to him. He exhales sharply, his breath warm against my neck, and I feel him shudder beneath my touch. His movements grow more deliberate, a slow yet undeniable rhythm that leaves me breathless. The sheer intimacy of it, the closeness, the way our bodies seem to move in perfect harmony, is overwhelming. Every brush of his skin against mine feels electric, a spark that ignites something deeper within me. His hands are everywhere, one tracing a delicate line down my back while the other presses against the curve of my hip, holding me steady as he sinks further into me. "You're intoxicating," he murmurs against my ear, his voice low and rough. His lips graze the sensitive skin just below, sending a shiver racing down my spine. There's a vulnerability in the way he moves, as if he's holding back just enough to ensure he doesn't lose control, and yet every motion conveys a passion that makes my heart ache. "Kay," I whisper, my voice barely audible, "it's just us. Let go." "Garina," he breathes, his voice trembling, "you're everything." He continues to push harder and harder into my ass. I can feel him growing bigger inside me, pulsating. He's so close, I know it. I arch my ass upwards, pushing myself more into his cock, and it sends him over the edge. He fills my ass with his cum. He lowers his head, his breath warm against my skin, and presses a kiss to the curve of my back. His lips linger there for a moment before I feel the sharp, electrifying sting as his fangs sink into me. A gasp escapes my lips as his grip tightens, his body pressing closer as he begins to drink. The sensation is overwhelming, a blend of pain and pleasure that leaves me trembling. His gulps are desperate, each one pulling at something deeper than just my blood. It feels as though he's drawing out my very essence, and yet, I don't want him to stop. A minute later, he releases me, collapsing onto the bed beside me. His chest rises and falls heavily, his expression distant, as if he's lost somewhere in the depths of his own mind. I turn to face him, brushing my fingers gently along the side of his face. His skin is cool, smooth, and I can feel the tension beneath the surface, the weight of his thoughts. "Kay," I whisper, but he doesn't respond. I lean forward and place a soft kiss on the top of his nose. The simple act seems to draw him back to me, his eyes flickering with awareness as they meet mine. He begins, his voice hesitant, but I cut him off with a playful smirk. "You bit me," I exclaim, feigning indignation. And before he can respond, I lean down and sink my teeth into his shoulder, not hard enough to hurt but enough to make him jolt. "Ah! Garina, ouch!" he exclaims, his surprise evident as he pulls back slightly, his eyes wide. I laugh, a light, carefree sound that fills the room. "Now we're even," I say with a grin. For a moment, the tension that had been etched into his features begins to melt away. The corners of his lips twitch, and a soft smile appears, one that lights up his entire face. "You truly are something else, me Garina," he says, his voice filled with a warmth that sends a flutter through my chest. I brush a strand of hair from his forehead, gazing into his eyes. I told you everything would be fine, I say, my voice steady, filled with certainty. But I still bit you, he murmurs, his smile faltering slightly. And after a few sips, you stopped, I reply, my tone gentle but firm. It's fine. I'm fine. The question is, are you fine? He hesitates for a moment before nodding. I guess I am, he admits, his voice soft. I lean closer, excitement sparking in my eyes. Can we do it again? Please. His brows raise in surprise. Now? He asks, his voice laced with disbelief. I nod, a wide smile spreading across my face. Yes, now. He chuckles, the sound rich and low, and it sends a shiver through me. I love you, Karina, he says, his voice full of raw emotion. And I love you, Kay, I reply, my words a whisper but no less fervent. He cups my cheek with his hand, his thumb brushing gently over my skin. Thank you for seeing me, he says, his voice breaking slightly. Truly seeing me. My chest tightens at the sincerity in his tone, and I lean in to kiss him, a soft, lingering kiss that speaks the words I can't. He deepens the kiss, his lips moving against mine with a mix of urgency and tenderness that makes my heart race. Without breaking the kiss, I press my palm firmly against his chest, guiding him onto his back. He follows my lead willingly, his gaze never leaving mine as he sinks into the pillows. The firelight flickers around us, casting warm shadows that dance across the walls. As I hover over him, I can see the vulnerability in his eyes, the trust he's placing in me, and it makes my heart ache with both love and longing. Kay, I whisper, my fingers tracing the lines of his jaw, you don't have to hide from me. Not ever. He reaches up, his hand resting over mine. With you, I feel like I don't have to, he says, his voice soft but steady. I smile, leaning down to kiss him again, and in that moment, nothing else matters but us. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was his and he was mine. The end.